All right, I think we're going to kick things off. Hi friends, welcome to our webinar. Today we'll be talking about how to establish biology to supply all of a plant's nutrition during the growing season. So for the last several years, we've been talking a lot about how important it is to have good biological populations, and that plant nutrition really needs to be absorbed. Nutrients really need to be absorbed by plants in the form of microbial metabolites, or as in the case of what we've been learning the last year or so from Dr. James White's work, in some cases in the form of absorbing entire bacteria, whole bacteria. And then of course, there's the whole interaction of mycorrhizal fungi and the contributions they make to plant nutrition and so forth. So it becomes clear once we start pursuing this biological approach to plant nutrition that managing and establishing good biology in the early stages of a plant's life is really important, because what happens is that when you have good microbial colonization of that root system right at germination, that colonization propagates along the root and grows out through the entire root system as the root system expands. And if we don't have good colonization shortly after germination, then that means that the plants have to recruit biology from the soil microbial profile. And this recruiting process means that the small seedling has to expend sugars, that it should really be pushing into further growth and expansion. So during the recruiting process, the challenge with the recruiting process is that in order to recruit these bacteria and fungi from the soil and to propagate them to colonize the entire root system takes a period of about 10 to 14 days, depending on which organism we're talking about and soil conditions and so forth, and all the different variables. So what happens is that in that 10 to 14 day period, as the plant is building this microbial population, it is also expanding its root system. And the result is that the root system actually grows out past where the biology are being recruited and being developed. And you end up that the plant never catches up. The biology never catches up to where the plant is for the rest of the growing season. So you really have started off behind the 8 ball. And we have come to realize that establishing good microbial, strong microbial populations on the root system right at germination is very important to getting the types of results that we want to see with biological nutrition. So in this webinar, I'm joined by Ted Bruns, who has been an AEA customer for a while, has also joined our team from Kansas. And Ted is going to tell us a little bit about the practices that they have used and some of the things that they've observed on their operation with the use of microbials at planting. Before I hand it off to you, Ted, I'll offer a bit more of an explanation for some of the biologicals and how we use them. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with our soil primer package, what we call our soil primer, that is a combination of Rejuvenate and Spectrum. And I'm not going to go into much detail on those products, but I want to talk a little bit about the BioCode Gold. So BioCode Gold is a product that has been designed along our design principles of developing a synergistic stack. So it contains bacterial inoculants, it contains fungal inoculants, specifically mycorrhizal fungi, and then it also contains different materials. I'm not legally allowed to use the word biostimulants here, but it allows materials, or it includes ingredients that are known to improve the vigor of these different organisms. I hope that's legally acceptable. We'll see what Tom says after the fact. But so we have this synergistic stack of materials and ingredients that include bacterial inoculants, fungal inoculants, and then products or ingredients that promote the development of those organisms. So it is really important when we think about different seeds and the way that seedlings germinate and grow. We have some plants, primarily the dicots, like beans, for example, or sunflowers, that when the seed is planted, if we use as that seedling germinates, it pushes the seed coat up and out of the ground. And for those plants, using BioCoat Gold or other inoculants as a seed coating is certainly useful, but there's some evidence to suggest that it may be as valuable or perhaps even more valuable to apply the inoculant in the furrow at planting, because as that seed moves up out of the ground, then you may lose some of that inoculant, or maybe saying it a different way, you no longer have that inoculant in immediate proximity to the developing root. For other plants, the monocots, such as small grains, grasses, corn, and so forth, where the seed remains in the ground, this is obviously not a concern to the same degree, and we actually seem to get a bigger effect from the inoculants applied to those seeds as a seed treatment. So those are, I wanted to talk specifically or just highlight the BioCode Gold and how that is designed and how we're using that and where we're getting the biggest, observing the biggest effects from it. So one of the pieces we also want to talk about is not just why you use it and what results can be achieved, but also how can you use it? What's the most effective way to apply it from a practical machinery perspective and so forth. So Ted, I'd like to turn things over to you, and I'd like for you to share a little bit of your experiences. Can you tell us about how did you first start using microbial inoculants several years ago? What are some of the results that you observed, and what has been your pathway? How do you apply them? If you could speak to that a little bit.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on today, John. I'm actually from Southwest Nebraska, real close to Kansas, and I work with all the Kansas growers in Western Kansas. So you kind of lump me in with that group. That's fine. Um, my story with biologicals goes back when I started doing organic farming. I've worked with several different organic fertilizer-based companies, and AEA has been the one that showed the most promising results. So that's why I'm working with them, and actually became a part of their team because I do believe in their products and their systems to promoting soil health, biology, everything to go with growing a healthy crop. And I guess I could start back in 2017 when I first was introduced to AEA and what they called the fall soil primer. We put it on through the pivot in the fall of 2017 on a corn crop, and we had a companion crop underneath that corn crop. A companion crop of Italian ryegrass had a very good stand of that companion crop. And I think putting that Rejuvenate, Sea Shield, and Spectrum through the pivot onto that companion crop, it really made a good stick, I guess you could call it, so that it did, the biology stuck with the plants and the soil and everything. So we had really good success that first year. And then in 2018 and 2019, we kind of went backwards where we didn't have very good companion crop underneath our corn crop. And we were more or less applying it on the fall soil primer on bare soil, and we did not see the same results. And then in the fall of 2019, on my wheat crop, I decided instead of spraying it on or putting it through the pivot, I decided, well, we're just going to put it in the starter. And then that's when we started to see things happening, changes in our soil, the soil tilth increasing. One big thing for me is Canada thistle going away. And I'm guessing that is because the biology was making the calcium that's in the soil more available to plants, and because that's why Canada thistle are in our region, is because of the lack of calcium. That's what the Canada thistle are trying to do. So I saw that in my, go ahead, John.
Yeah, if we can, I'd love to go back to your 2017 application. You said that you had this cover crop, you got really good results the following year, and then not such great results the next couple of years.
Correct.
When you say you got good results, what were you observing? What were the results that you were seeing?
The soil tilth, the Canada thistle going away. We're an organic farm. It's been what's that, John?
That happened immediately in 1 year?
Yes. Yes. And we could not it was an aha moment, like, yes, we found something to help with our Canada thistle problem, because this has been an organic farm for more than 10 years. And prior to that, low herbicide use and everything. So the management of Canada thistle was more mechanical than anything else. And yeah, we saw that in the first year, but we could not replicate that in the years 2019 or 2018 and 2019. We couldn't replicate that for 2 years until I decided to put it into my starter in furrow, and it could be a combination of the BioCode Gold, all that, all those products mixed together at planting. So we're going to try it again this year, and I think we're going to see the same results, because what I saw in my wheat crop in the spring of 2020 with the Canada thistle going away, increased soil tilth, I wanted to do that again on some of my other acres, putting that in furrow at planting, and I had all my other crops already planted besides one. My sunflowers, they don't get planted until June, the middle of June, and I went and put the full rate of soil primer, 1 gallon of Rejuvenate, 1 gallon of Sea Shield, 50 grams of Spectrum, and then of course BioCode Gold on the seed, and we got the same results instantly. I mean, the Canada thistle was as thick as carpet in those patches, and the biology just decimated them. I mean, wow. It's truly is amazing. I love it. I love it because it makes Canada thistle management easy. So on an organic farm, yeah, Canada thistle are a problem. So
yeah, so you went through your formula pretty quickly. Can you tell us again what it was that you applied, and also how you applied it? How is it positioned in relation to the seed?
Right. I think that's very important. With the grain drill of drilling wheat, it is just the fertilizer is applied out through the seed firmers. But we had a rain right after that, so that probably helped the biology go in. That's a good way of putting in furrow fertilizer or biology in furrow. But the best way is the 0x2, getting that fertilizer or inoculation of a biology under the seed at planting. That is the best way to introduce biology with a seedling or a germinating seed. So
I'm curious, Ted, why do you think the 0x2 is better than right in the furrow with the seed?
But it is right in the furrow. It's just maybe a ½ inch or an inch below the seed.
Got it.
A lot of planters have the 2x2, which is 2 inches off to the side and 2 inches down. Mine's 0x2. Plant the popcorn or corn seed, 1.5 inches, 2 inches down. So it's right there with it. So
yeah, so the replication of the Canadian thistle experience, both what was it now, 2020 growing season on 2 crops, and a 2018 growing season with 1 crop. You also described that you observed noticeable changes in soil tilth. Were you measuring that in any way, or how could you tell that with your machinery equipment? What were you observing?
Not really with my machinery equipment, just with my hand and a shovel, a good old farmer's foot and shovel, and the shovel going in easier, just better soil aggregation, not so compacted layers and platey type soil, more crumbly. So,
Ted, this reminds me of a conversation I had with one of our other consultants and a farmer from Canada last week. He said that I have a problem. I've used your soil primer now. I think he's used it once or twice. And he said, now, wherever I apply commercial nitrogen, I actually get a yield drag effect rather than a yield benefit because its baseline yields have increased to such a degree. That made me laugh. That was a lot of fun. So when, can you give us you quickly mentioned the formula that you've been applying in the furrow. Can you give that to us again? Are you using BioCode Gold on the seed or in the furrow? And then what are you applying in the furrow?
On the seed, BioCode Gold at 4 ounces per 100 pounds of seed, as recommended on the label. And then the in-furrow soil primer, which is a gallon of Rejuvenate, a gallon of Sea Shield, and the 50 grams of Spectrum. Now, there is other things in my starter that I put in. I'll put a pint or a quart of humicarb, a pint or a quart of C-stem, and a lot of that just depends on the field and the budget for that field. And then whatever micronutrients that are required for that field based off the soil test. Being an organic farmer, that's all we can do. We can't just go do a broadcast of whatever, a micro pack. We can't use a micro pack. We have to be very itemized with our nutrients that we put on. We can't just do a broadcast, do them all. So
I actually think it's a benefit for you that you're not able to put on nitrogen and phosphorus in the starter, because I'm sure you get a bigger response from your biology because of that. That may be part of the reason why you're seeing such effectiveness. So go ahead.
The one thing I did notice in my sunflower crop, in taking the sap test, is we had adequate calcium. On all my other saps from years prior and on my corn crop, always show that I'm low on calcium. We have all kinds of calcium in our soil, but we did not have to apply any hollow cal, any calcium product for our sunflowers last year. And I'm thinking that's because of the increased soil biology.
Wow.
So, yeah.
You've been applying foliar applications of holocal in the past or other calcium sources?
Yes.
And still having difficulty getting good plant absorption and good plant levels of calcium.
Right. Yeah.
Just can you give us some context? What were your historical sap analysis numbers roughly? What type of range were they compared to where they are now? I'm on the spot. Supposed to have a good
yeah, I'd have to go into the files and look at that. But yes, I do have the data that what I applied previous years. Being organic, you have to have all these records. And yes, I have them all. I just got to dig them up, John. So
no need for that. I should have given you a heads up in advance, but wasn't sure we were going to go there.
Okay.
What experiences have you had regarding mixing and putting the primer on in furrow? I know that one of the challenges that is sometimes expressed is getting the product applied in a timely manner if you mix it, and then it needs to be applied within a matter of 4 to 6 hours so that the biology doesn't become too alive. How do you manage that?
Keep it out of the sun. Using colder water seems to help. But I've never, I've had longer time frames of more like 8 to 10 hours. You're saying 4 to 6 hours. I've gone 8 to 10 hours. Mostly it's keeping it out of the sun so it doesn't warm up and start to grow on you. And heat up. So yeah. And I think application is very important. I personally do not like foliar sprays. The most foliar spray I'll do is going to the pivot with a lot of water. I'm not saying they're not beneficial. Just on my experience, they don't fit into my program. So.
Got it. So what advice would you have for anyone who's considering using the soil primer in the spring instead of in the fall, and using BioCode Gold?
I think the soil primer was originally developed as a residue digester breakdown nutrient cycling program, and on my soils, I have low organic matter, lighter soils. I want the residue on top to help with wind erosion. We're on the Great Plains here in western Nebraska, and we have a lot of wind erosion. So I really don't want it to be broke down. I want it to stay on there all winter long. So if you got low organic matters, you got a lighter soil, I think it's very beneficial to put it in furrow at planting with the seed. And as that seedling grows and the roots go out, it brings that biology with it. The soil microbes in the plant have a relationship. They help each other out. The soil microbes help feed the plant, and then the root exudates help feed the soil microbes. They're just a good relationship between them.
There's a couple of questions that have come through. We're going to switch over to some of the questions. One of these questions is for you, Ted. Well, in fact, all of them are. Could you talk about how you agitate and filter the AEA products before you apply them through the pivot or through the planter?
Yes, we use 50 mesh screens. What I do is I'll take my screens out of my mixing tank, take my screens out of my mixing tender. It's not really a mixing tank, it's my tender, where you're just transporting the mix and the solution from your mixing station to your planter or to your pivot. I leave all the filters out, let it agitate without the filters, I don't know, for 15, 20 minutes or whatever. And then I will stick my filters in and then take it out of my fertilizer tender and put it into my tanks for my saddle tanks on my tractor for planting. Or I'll just put the filter in when I transfer it over to the tank that's sitting at my pivot. And then again, at the pivot, it goes through a fertilizer ejection pump and it's actually filtered again. But I don't typically have any problems there. It's usually all filtered out by the 50 mesh screens that I use on my tender. Mixing, I got my totes all set up in what I call my fertilizer bay in my building. And I just climb up top with a paint stirrer and mix each product individually inside the tote that it is in, get it good and agitated as per the label on your products. And then I go and have a mixing tote that I measure out all the products and put it into the mixing tote. Yeah, some products don't always go together, like Hollow Cow is a high pH, and then some of your micronutrients are sulfate based, like zinc sulfates. They have a low pH, so you will have a reaction. So sometimes it helps to dilute it with water to keep that reaction low.
So you're really only filtering once. You're filtering after agitation. You're filtering during the transfer, essentially, from the tender to wherever you're putting it.
Correct. Yes.
And in your planter application, you talked about some of the different products that you might be applying in that application. What is your total per acre application rate? Are you adding, I guess the question I'm asking is, how much water are you adding with that? How much carrier is there?
Right. You got the carrier solution is 10 to 15 gallons per acre is my carrier solution. So then you got your gallon of Sea Shield, your gallon of Rejuvenate, and then if you add up all the micronutrients and the humic carb in the seed stem, I mean, you're looking at maybe 4 gallons at the most of actual product. So then my total solution of that is somewhere between 10 and 15 gallons. It depends on if I'm using my planter or my side dress applicator, they take different rates. So, yeah.
And then do you have any filters on the planter rig or on the nozzles?
Yeah, I have a filter that's underneath my saddle tanks. From when it comes out of the saddle tanks that are on the tractor, there's a filter from between the tanks and the planter or the side dress applicator. There's another filter there, but I seldom get clogging there. So most of the time it's clogging is at the fertilizer tender. And it seems like that is less the more I let it agitate into tender. I have a cone bottom tender that can agitate the solution. And it just seems like the more you can let it agitate, but you don't always have that much time in a day. So, you know.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you have very few challenges with the setup that you were describing, and sometimes growers report having lots of challenges, and it's often because they're applying 4 to 5 gallons per acre of total solution at
Yeah.
high pressure with very fine nozzles.
Yes.
And
I just spoke with a grower this morning and talking to him about putting it in furrow, and he's coming out his seed firmers. And I said, what's the rate that comes out of them seed firmers? And he said 5 gallons per acre. And I said, that is not enough if you want to put the full rate of soil primer on. I said, that will not be enough. So it kind of sounded like he was going to put some through the firmer and then the rest in his 2x2. So.
so there's a follow-up question here. On a smaller farm where you are using a spreader or frost seeding for pasture seeding, how and when would you apply the soil primer and the BioCode Gold?
Well, the BioCoat Gold, you can put with your clover seed, but most clover seeds already have an inoculant on it. But the BioCoat Gold is a better additional inoculant. You know, get your mycorrhizal fungi in that. But as far as putting the soil primer on, I would put it on with a sprayer, probably early in the spring, and use a streamer type nozzle and get it, you know, close to the ground as you can, so it gets underneath the canopy of the clover. But I'm kind of confused. Does he already have a crop? Yeah.
Sounds like it might just be pasture seeding. I don't know if it's reseeding or not.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if he's already got pasture and he's got a lot of grass out there and he's trying to establish some clovers in the mix, obviously inoculate the clover with the BioCode Gold, and then go out there with a sprayer with like a drip nozzle, or they call it a streamer nozzle, or do it at night when there's a dew or something like that. Don't do it during the hot day. Your biology might not stick, as I call it. So
let's talk a little bit about stick, Ted, because you mentioned this. What do you attribute the differences to in your 2017 versus 18 and 19 applications? You said a couple of years where you did not get the response. You mentioned there being a difference in the cover crop, but were there also moisture differences?
yes,
What was the full story there?
in the fall of 2017, we had higher humidity here, and we did it later in the fall. We did it in October through the pivot, where in the fall of 2018 and 2019, we did it earlier. One application was actually the last week of August. And, in last week of August, still pretty hot and high or low humidity. Here in the Great Plains, we get humidities during the day down to 15%. That's not good for biology survival. Trying to introduce it to the soil unless you're soil applying it. That's about the only way you can help save that biology from being wasted, being basically essentially killed by the dryness. So
Yeah. So there's one more question here, Ted, for you, and then a few that I'll jump in on as well. Question from Glenn Fredrickson: what water source are you using as a carrier? Are you using just regular well water or RO water, rainwater? What are you using?
I've used rainwater, but it doesn't rain a whole lot here in western Nebraska sometimes, so I have to just use a regular well water. Our water from the well, it's got a high pH. Lots of calcium in it. I'm guessing calcium bicarbonates, which sometimes can be detrimental, but have not seen too much a problem to justify an RO system. So try to collect rainwater. That's the best you can get. I think that's even better than RO water. That's my opinion. So.
Well, certainly reverse osmosis puts a lot of pressure on the water molecule, and with all the pressure that is applied there, it can affect the structuring for certain. There's a few questions here on BioCoat Gold formulation. Question from John. BioCoat Gold seems to have a good mix of bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi for our nursery trees at planting. Are the fungi compatible with tree crops, and how would we best apply it? Or do you have a better suggestion of biology to apply at planting? So the answer is yes. The mycorrhizal fungi are compatible with deciduous trees. So the mycorrhizae that they contain are all endomycorrhizae. So if you're growing conifers or trees that have symbiotic relationships with the ectomycorrhizal groups, then you will probably want to get some inoculants specifically for those. And the BioCoat Gold would not be the right fit for conifers and evergreens. And then regarding application on tree fruit, when we were planting, well, I immediately said tree fruit, but when you're planting trees or perennial plants, the best way to apply the BioCoat Gold or any combination is as a seed soak, or goodness, not as a seed soak, but as a root dip. And just to create a liquid solution of it and dip the roots in it at planting or immediately before planting. Then there is a couple of questions here from Angelo. When I applied the fall primer, I observed that the young clay soil was all cracked and had much finer soil aggregates, not requiring tillage. Is this a normal occurrence? And Angelo, I would say the answer is yes. This is a fairly normal occurrence. What Ted has described, we actually see on a lot of the farms that apply. In fact, I think I can almost safely say we see it on all soils where Rejuvenate is applied. And it's the primer package in total, but the Rejuvenate is particularly known for this, in that it stimulates biology to such a degree that we get very rapid soil aggregation. And of course, it takes bacteria and fungi, and it takes this whole group of organisms to have that happen. But I still remember when we first introduced Rejuvenate, this is now probably 9 or 10 years ago, the year after we put it out there for the first time, that next spring, we put it on in the fall, and that next spring we got dozens of phone calls, people saying, I can till my soil with my tractor 1 gear faster. And we actually had one of our consultants who has now passed away and is no longer with us, but he asked farmers to put on split trials, and he promised he would be able to tell them, and not tell him which section of a field was treated. He promised to be able to tell them which section was treated simply by walking across it. And he was able to do that simply by feeling with his feet which area was softer and which was firmer. And that to me was quite remarkable. He was never wrong. He was not wrong once, which is really intriguing. There's a follow-up question here. Trichoderma is known to be very beneficial to root systems of plants. Does the BioCoat Gold have it as a part of the stack? And if not, why not? So the answer is BioCoat Gold does not have trichoderma. Not because we don't think it's a good organism, because it can be valuable, but trichoderma has a reputation for being a bit of a bully, if you will, being very aggressive, and that it can outcompete other organisms. So before we want to add trichoderma into the system, we first want to make sure that these other biology are very well established. Question from Jay Johnson. Are there pesticides or other chemicals that poison soil biology chemicals to avoid? What do you do to detox the soil of poisons? Well, the answer is you don't put on any poisons. That's step one. And then There are a number of inoculants that were originally developed to remediate hydrocarbons that seem to be fairly effective at improving crop responses on soils that have a history of pesticide applications. One of them that we use for this purpose is called OP8, and it seems that whenever we apply it on soils that have a history of lots of pesticide applications, we get a very nice crop response from that. We have one more question here from John. Hi, John. How can you apply BioCoat Gold as a root dip? Isn't it hydrophobic? And the answer is no, it's not hydrophobic. It is not water soluble because the mycorrhizal fungi and the bacteria, of course, are not, they cannot be dissolved in water, but they are water suspendable. So you can suspend them in water. And I think this goes back to the whole filtration question that has been coming up as well. If you want to include BioCoat Gold in the furrow, this is why you need to have 50 mesh screens and slightly larger nozzles, because it is not truly water soluble, it's just water suspendable. So those are the questions that have come through. Ted, I'll go back to you for one last question. And the question is, what advice would you have for people who are curious about the use of BioCoat Gold and Rejuvenate and Sea Shield and haven't used it yet before?
Curious about it. Well, I would, if you're a lover of biology, they're good biological products. All I know is what I've learned about applying it, how to apply it, and how not to apply it, and how the environment, mostly humidity and heat, can be detrimental to the biology that you're trying to inoculate the soil with. Say the question again, John, please.
What advice do you have for people who are curious about using it for the first time? I like asking the questions that make people think.
Yeah. I guess, biology is kind of a finicky thing. I guess treat it like a baby. A baby wouldn't like to be sit out in the hot sun. A baby wouldn't like to be exposed to the wind and the dryness of the Great Plains where I live. And I see a lot of people go out and spray a bare soil field with biology and thinking, oh, that's gonna grow a good crop next year. Well, I don't think so. I think you just wasted your money, and if you didn't incorporate it in a timely manner, that's my best advice I can give you is follow the label directions, follow what your advice from your AEA consultant, or even the customer care team. Us consultants are teaching them, this is the best way to apply these products, and try to steer the customers in the right direction. So follow the labels. And time is of the essence when it comes to biology. You just can't let it sit out in the sun. You gotta think that these products are living things. They're soil microbes, and you have to treat them nicely, or they're just going to die in your tank mix, in your applicator. So I see a lot of farmers get frustrated because, oh, that didn't work. Well, I guess how did you apply it? When did you apply it? Is my first questions to them.
Thank you, Ted. Thanks for those insights. If any of you have any additional follow-up questions, please reach out to the AEA team. You can also connect to Ted or I through the AEA team as well. And if you have any questions about BioCoat Gold, also please reach out and ask. I'm quite excited by the results that you're reporting, Ted. If we can effectively get control of Canadian thistle on your operation, I now want to replicate that on other operations as well. So
yes,
that'll change the landscape. That'll change the landscape.
Yes, at least in the organic farming, that has been a challenge for lots of years, and I hope I found something here. We'll find out. I'm getting ready to start the 2021 season, and that is my goal, to put that full rate of soil primer in all of my starters. So,
Wonderful. Thank you, Ted. Thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you find it useful, and wish you a successful and awesome spring growing season. And we will speak with all of you again on our next webinar. See you then. Have an awesome day. Thank you.